for me, defining community, it's about people who see you. And it can feel really nice. I mentioned in the last episode that when I go into my favorite Chinese restaurant, the elderly guy who owned it, he's since retired and I think moved back to China, but he always knew my order. And so that feels like community in a way, but it's not really. That's just almost like the outer circle of communities. If you don't show up and get your daily newspaper, they might ask around and say, oh, where is so and so? They haven't shown up. But who's actually going to come and knock on your door? Who's going to call your son? Who's going to visit you in the hospital? That's real community. And that takes intention because it doesn't happen accidentally. Most of us are born into a community. And these are people that know us and see us so deeply that they are willing to be with us when we need things. But also, there is the expectation that we are there for them when they need things. And I think we have gotten to a point in society where we look at expectations as sort of a bad word.
Welcome to Flourish in the Foreign, the award-winning podcast that celebrates, elevates, and affirms the voices and stories of Black women living and thriving abroad, while exploring living abroad as a pathway to wellness. I'm your host, Christine Job, a Black American with Trinidadian roots, business strategist and writer from Atlanta, based in Valencia, Spain. Hey everyone, welcome to Flourish in the Foreign. I am Christine, and welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. I'm so happy that you all are here. What a time in the world. There is so much going on, and I just want to offer this to all of you. One, migration is inherently political. Okay? Full stop. And within migration, there is the possibility, the dream, the intention for wellness. And you do have to sacrifice a sense of wellness in the pursuit of another wellness. Okay? I want to offer that because a lot of people aspire to go abroad. Perhaps you're listening to this and wanting to go abroad. I want you to be rooted in that type of message. Okay? You guys know how I feel about escapism and romanticization. And during times like these, I understand. I understand dissociation. Hell, I understand escapism and romanticization, but I just want you to be rooted in the truth. Okay? I also wanted to shout out to everyone who has shown me so much love this week. Yeah. I mean, I do get emails and messages and DMs and all types of shout outs weekly, but this past week has been especially lovely. I had an amazing comment left on my Substack. If y'all haven't followed me on Substack, go ahead and do that. I'm not going to call you out because I didn't ask. I don't want to put you on blast, but shout out to you and your daughter. I'm so happy that listening to this podcast has inspired you. And I'm just so pleased. And a lot of y'all have been leaving me messages and comments on Spotify. I've been getting back to y'all. I love it, guys. I love it. So please keep the messages coming. If you haven't written me a review, please do that if you feel so inspired. And in these times of uncertainty, darkness, this is where community comes into play, right? Community is what sustains us for real. It absolutely sustains you abroad. And so I just want all of you to lean on your community, to cultivate your community. Join me in community here at Flourish in the Foreign. Catch me in Substack, catch me wherever. And let's cultivate community because you don't have to do this alone and you shouldn't do this alone. Life is not meant to be done alone. We're here to support each other. Okay? All right. That's enough yapping for me. On to the episode. Season 6, Episode 3. We're continuing our limited series that will probably be an ongoing series about aging abroad. And today we have another amazing past podcast guest, Ani Lacy. Be sure to check out Ani's first episode with me, and that's Season 4, Episode 5. Ani is a transdisciplinary artist whose practice explores migration, cultural memory, and resilience. Working primarily with wild clay and terracotta, Ani is deeply attuned to the inherent impermanence of clay as a metaphor for the fluidity of personal and cultural narratives. After completing a Master of Fine Arts from Bath Spa University in 2021, she went on to exhibit her work in Bath, London, New York, and Japan, including a residency with the BEPPU project in Kyushu, Japan, where she immersed herself in local clay practices. From her studio in Bath, Ani's artistic practice continues to explore the boundaries of the materiality of clay, focusing on themes of loss, memory, and cultural reclamation. I really enjoyed recording with Ani and getting her reflections on aging abroad, which I just think are so invaluable. But I will let Ani tell you all about it.
My name is Ani Lacy. I'm 41 years old and I live in Bath in England. And I came here in 2020 to do a Master of Fine Arts, as well as just to expatriate. I wanted to get out of the country, and getting an international degree was a way for me to do that. And I've been here for 4 years. I'm still in the same place. So the last time we talked, just to give a little bit of context, when I first left America, I went to Mexico and I was the coconut person. I was, let me just sit on the beach and do that. And I think I quickly realized that life is never going to be a nonstop vacation. It's just unrealistic. I think COVID taught a lot of us that, living abroad and understanding that we really need to create community and put down roots somewhere in the world in order to be safe when things get very difficult. In the case of a global pandemic, which I hope never happens in my lifetime again, but it was something that we had to deal with that really woke me up. So the last time I talked to you, I was actually in Japan. I was there for a 3-month residency. So I was hired to be an artist in residence for an arts organization in rural Japan. So I was embedded with the arts organization, but the Japanese government essentially paid me to be there, to be an artist and to work with local artists, local people. So I did a lot there in terms of cultural exchange. I had a studio. And when I got back to England, I had a really big upheaval in my personal life that really made me start to think about aging abroad in a particular type of way in terms of security. So, in my last episode, I talked about my landlord being an immigrant and him giving me this place, and it was great. And I still think that he's a lovely person, but I also think that there were some sort of cultural differences. And so, when I got back from Japan about a month later, the local fire department basically shut my landlord down for renting me an illegal apartment. I had not known for all of the time that I'd lived there that it was an illegal apartment, but it didn't meet fire code standards. So this is not to say anything negative about him. It could be just culturally, he didn't understand what the requirements were in England for renting out an apartment. But what happened was I was facing a huge financial burden that I did not expect. So because I am not settled, I'm not a British citizen. At that time, I was not able to get counsel help because the terms of my immigration say that I have no recourse to public funds. So typically in a situation where you lose your home quickly, if you're in your home country, you have something, you have someone. But for me, I was really faced with this sort of upheaval. And that really opened my eyes in a lot of ways. But I realized that I needed a safety net. I didn't have a government to rely on because this government is not my government. And I didn't have family because I don't have family here. I just had myself and my son at the time. And then I ended up moving and I went into debt, the equivalent of essentially a full year's salary for the average British person. You can Google that if you want to know what it is. But it was a substantial amount of money that I had to outlay. And so I really just hustled. Luckily, the year before, I just switched to a different visa that allowed me to be a freelancer. So I just hustled and I created a financial safety net for myself. I got married in October of 2023. So just my 1 year anniversary just passed and everything seemed to be great. My husband is Moroccan, so he's also an immigrant, sort of expat immigrant. So we have really been able to support each other in this idea of being foreigners in a foreign land, type thing, and that's been really important for me. But fast forward a few months, and I just hadn't been feeling well. I called the GP several times and I talked in the last episode about my experience with the NHS and finding a lump in my body. And I'd gone in and they'd taken care of it. It turned out to be a cyst, so it was fine. So I found another lump, and this time it was not a cyst. This time it was a tumor, but it took quite some time to be diagnosed. So that was very stressful. And when it came time for me to go into the hospital, it was just very overwhelming, very sudden. When it came time for me to go into the hospital, I was told I had to go under general anesthesia. And at that point, my son was still 17. So he's 18 now. But it really hit me, oh, wow. Like, I need community. I need a support network. And I reached out to, luckily, I have been attending a synagogue for the last few years. And so my religious community really stepped up and offered me a lot of support. But I also realized this is part of aging. As well as you can take really great care of yourself. There's some things you just can't predict. I think I take pretty good care of myself. When I went into the doctor, they said, we don't know what caused this tumor. We don't know what the risk factors are. It's a very rare tumor. It's usually diagnosed in people 60 years or above. We don't know why you have it. We do know that it always turns into cancer, so we're going to go ahead and take it out. And that was that. So there was nothing that they could tell me. They couldn't say, oh, if you eat less of this, or you walk more, or you do this, or you sleep better, you can avoid this. There was nothing. It just happens to some people. And so that was another thing that kind of made me think, oh, wow, this is part of living a longer life, because the longer you live, the more likely sort of these one off things are to happen to you. So that was a huge part of my life. And I just had my surgery in April of this year. So about, I think, 6 months ago now. September of last year, I started a PhD in history of art. So in September of this year, I've just turned in my first chapter, which is like a big sigh of relief. I've been doing a lot. I did another artist residency, this time here in England for 6 months with a local organization. And I am currently building a studio in my back garden because the entire artist collective that I'm a part of is being evicted from our building. Something happened with the landlord. He sold the building. I don't know, just a lot of sort of drama, like business people stuff that ended up with us being evicted, not for not paying rent, not for any issues that we created. The owner just wanted the building back. So I decided to just build my own studio in my own back garden. So I have it, get up in the morning, get my coffee, and go out back. So that's really a huge change from before. The last time I talked to you, I was, of course, still living in Bath where I live now, but I was commuting to Bristol to go to my studio. So that was quite the commute. And now it's just a lot more easy, which is how I like to live. I like to have sort of an easy life. But yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell, what I've been through these last 2 years.
I asked Ani how she felt living abroad has changed her concept of aging, or even how she feels about aging.
So the 26th of October was just the 10-year anniversary of my grandmother's death. And the year before that, my cousin died. And I talked about that, I think, in the last episode. But when she died, in her home, there was me, my uncle, my son. So she had four generations of people in the home supporting her. And likewise with my great aunt, my late grandfather's sister, when she was told, oh, you need hospice care, instead of sending her to a hospice, her daughter called her daughter and she came home. So then she also had four generations in the home sort of around her as she died, as she approached the end of her life. And that has been very normal in my family of origin, in my birth family. The idea of sending someone away to a care home or hiring somebody to help is really foreign. On the one hand, it can feel very sacrificing that you put your life on hold for 1 or 2 years as your elderly relative is dying. But on the other hand, I have looked at it as such a huge honor to have been able to be with my grandmother as she was passing away. And even at the very end, I held her hand and I could feel her. And I felt very honored that I could be with her and I could hold her hand as she transitioned. Um, but here in the UK, the culture is completely different. The culture is overwhelmingly care homes. My concept of aging has really shifted. Even having a community here, I've put a lot of effort into creating community in different ways. My arts community is really great, as well as my synagogue community. And those are the communities that I've invested in the most because those are the communities that give back to me the most. Not very often, but relatively often people will reach out to the synagogue and say, hey, so and so's at the hospital. Can you go visit them? Can you bring them something to eat? Oh, their son or their daughter or their wife or someone needs something. So there is a community in place to help each other as we age. However, it is still overwhelmingly, you're going to end up in a care home is the best case scenario, unless you go pretty suddenly. If you experience any sort of cognitive or physical decline in this country, the culture is care homes. And so that has really shifted my idea around aging and what my expectations might be, how I might end up if I stay here until I'm elderly. Ideally, I would like to go home. I would like to age in community, in my original community with my cousins and my relatives, and also in community with the land. I have a really deep connection with the land itself as to where I was born and where my family is from. And I really miss it in a lot of ways. So I've really been thinking about that, but then also you can't always plan what's going to happen because you hear these stories about expats who are, for instance, in Thailand or Mexico or Costa Rica or any country where the healthcare is relatively inexpensive. And so they don't really buy insurance. And they may end up, unfortunately, dealing with a serious illness or an injury, and they just don't have the money to get the care that they need. So, for instance, day to day, regular preventative healthcare is pay out of pocket, inexpensive. It's no problem. But if you do get something like dementia or cancer or something like that, then you may be looking at something that you can't quite sustain. So I've thought about that as well in terms of when I was younger, I felt a lot more free to go to places like Mexico and just kind of YOLO it out there. And now I feel a lot more responsible for putting things in place so that I have repatriation insurance no matter what, so that I have enough available on my credit cards because some insurance companies require that you pay up front and then you get reimbursed later. So I've become much more mindful of the different aspects of aging abroad. And that's really changed for me in these last few years as I've dealt with my own health issues and my own sort of humanity and mortality. One of the things I've specifically thought about being in the UK is a lack of gaslighting that I encounter as a Black woman here. And I ran into it when I enrolled my son in college or in university. So he goes to an American university, but he's taking online classes, doing study abroad, those sorts of things. So when I went to enroll him, it was so interesting because there was a form that we needed to get notarized. And I had to go with him because he was under 18 at the time. And so we go to a British notary, and there was one mark that was wrong. So I sent it off. I had to send it by courier to America. And they called me. They said, oh, this is not right and you need to fix it. So I go back to the British notary, and who's also a solicitor here. And so he looked at me, he said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, this is how it is in America. And he just was like, this is the most ridiculous thing. And they looked at one of his assistants and he talked about this previous thing. I can't remember the details. And he said, that was America too, wasn't it? Yeah. So like he's thought up this story of like the last time he had to do something ridiculous. And it was also to do with America. And so I bring that up to say that when it comes to aging abroad, there are so many reasons you can choose a country. But I think one of the things that we need to consider is what the systems are like. For instance, my former mother in law from my first marriage lives in Nicaragua. And the systems there are very difficult to navigate because it is what it is. This is their culture. And so if she needs to extend her visa, if she needs to get a permit for something, it's always a hassle. Here in the UK, you fill out the form. If you fill out the form correctly, it's done. And so for me, that really enables me to age well. Now, this is not to say that you won't be able to deal with it, but as you're getting older to know yourself, because your patience goes down necessarily. Like my patience is, I understand my grandmother so much now. 100% understand her because I'm not here for it. I will walk away so fast and not even in an unhappy way. I've had people stop me in stores where I've gone in and said, oh, this is wrong. And they're like, we're not going to fix it. And I've just said, okay. And the salesperson's just looking at me as I'm just like, just leisurely walking away. And they come and they're like, actually, we'll fix it for you because I'm not raising my voice. My energy is, I'm done. I do not care. I do not care. And that's where I personally am. So when you are in a country, do things with the system there, whether that is getting a house, getting a job, getting a car. Don't just come with your laptop and sit in a digital nomad cafe, for 5 years and you're renting off Airbnb. That is the easy life. I want you to try to register for something with the government. I want you to try to get a legal form filled out. I want you to try to do a bank wire transfer for something, not just via PayPal. I want you to do a real bank transfer with the local banks. See what the system is like because you don't want to be in a situation where you're sick and tired. Like when I was diagnosed with my tumor, I was like, oh, how do I even set up my will here? Like I have a will in America. I hadn't even thought of who gets custody of my son. And he was almost 18. But it really depends on how old your children are. Who gets custody of them? What are the laws in the country? How efficient is it? Are they going to, and this is what my husband says about Morocco, and he can say that because it's his country. So these are his words, not mine. That the culture is very much, because I talked about how I had a housekeeper who basically wanted me to pay when I lived in Fez, wanted me to pay her son's tuition. And he said, this is part of the culture. They wouldn't ask another Moroccan to do it, but they will ask you because they perceive you as a rich foreigner. They don't see you as a human. And so if you're in a country where they are not going to see you as a human when you're vulnerable, you need to consider that because what if something happens where you really need help and you really need people to see you as a human? And if the systems are difficult or they're corrupt, how is that going to work out? When you're young, it seems a little bit easier to get out of those situations. If you're incapacitated in a hospital somewhere, it's really difficult. And things like financial abuse happen even in our home country. So if you're abroad alone and you're perceived as, the one wealthy American in maybe a poor neighborhood or a poor country, and you employ 6 or 7 people, what are the odds that they're going to commit fraud to drain your accounts? And this is not to accuse anyone of anything, but this is just to say that it's really important to be realistic. And so people ask, why would you move to England? First of all, it's the south of England. So we do get sun here. Not much, but we do get sun here. And it's close to France. I go to France and North Africa a lot. But part of the reason is that these systems are easy for me to navigate and relatively not corrupt, so that if I do become incapacitated in some way, I feel pretty sure that my son would be able to manage, work with my sister and work with the people around me to be okay if something were to happen to me and I were incapacitated. I don't think I'd have a lot of people just jumping on me and trying to extract resources from me as I'm vulnerable.
An important part of anyone's life is community, but I'm particularly interested in community in relationship to aging, because to me, that is one of the foundational principles to cultivating a life well lived, having an engaged, dynamic community to be a part of. And so I asked Ani, how does she define community? And what did she do to cultivate community abroad?
For me, defining community, it's about people who see you. And it can feel really nice. I mentioned in the last episode that when I go into my favorite Chinese restaurant, the elderly guy who owned it, he's since retired and I think moved back to China, but he always knew my order. And so that feels like community in a way, but it's not really. That's just almost like the outer circle of communities. If you don't show up and get your daily newspaper, they might ask around and say, oh, where is so and so? They haven't shown up. But who's actually going to come and knock on your door? Who's going to call your son? Who's going to visit you in the hospital? That's real community. And that takes intention because it doesn't happen accidentally. Most of us are born into a community, and these are people that know us and see us so deeply that they are willing to be with us when we need things. But also, there is the expectation that we are there for them when they need things. And I think we have gotten to a point in society where we look at expectations as sort of a bad word. Like, go into your relationships, don't have any expectations, no expectations, no expectations. On the one hand, yeah, you can't really project onto people your expectations, but you can set standards. And you can say to yourself, if I'm investing in this person, my community, I'm investing in them and I'm showing up for them at the hospital, I'm bringing them meals when they're sick. Are they able to do the same for me? And sometimes they're not. Sometimes maybe they're at the end of their life and they're never going to be able to give that back to you. But this is really important for me. A community is sort of an interrelated web of people. It's not just two people. Because what happens when you have your entire support network in one person is that if that person is gone, your support network is gone. But also, it can be quite difficult for that one person because maybe they're not able to give you 100% of what you need. Maybe they can give you 20% of what you need. And so, when you have this interrelated sort of web or interdependent web of people, what you're able to do then is to assign different roles for different people who can do things. So maybe one person can bring you meals, one person can drive you to appointments, one person can pick up your kid from school. But to expect one person to do all of those things is really difficult. So you can have expectations of your community. And I suppose that's not the same as having expectations of an individual person who may not be able to show up for you in that moment. But also, you have to be willing to give what you can. And sometimes you can't give everything. For instance, we have bring and share lunches very often on Saturday at my synagogue. And I always just bring hummus because I don't cook anymore. It's a lot. It's a lot of effort. And then I have to get on the train and go to Bristol. So it's a lot. So I'm just the hummus person. But there are people who cook, these delicious things from scratch. And that's what they do. And that's how they give to the community. That's something that they can contribute. So we all contribute what we can. And we also have to accept, because no one ever says to me, like, why do you only bring hummus? Like, why have you not baked us a cake? No one's ever said that to me. No one's ever had that expectation of me. So understanding that it's also being accepted for what you can give and having that be enough. Sometimes it's not enough. I had a friend at university who used to say, she was a straight A student. She used to win everything. And she used to say, sometimes your best is not enough. And as we got older and she started dating, she was the first of us to get married, like first of my friend group to get married. And she was super strict about it. She would go out on dates with guys. She'd say, no, no. And we'd be like, oh, he's so nice. She's like, sometimes your best is just not good enough. And she would just move on. Because at the end of the day, you have to determine before you get too close to a community or a person, is their best good enough for me? And it's good for them and it's good for you to know that. So when you're integrating yourself into communities, giving what you can give. And if what you give is not enough, if you feel judged, if you feel like people are asking you for too much, or they don't feel like you're doing what you should do, or you feel berated or anything like that, then having the courage to step back and seek out a new community that is able to meet you where you're at. So I think that's a really important aspect of community that we very rarely talk about. So yes, we'll see how it develops as I continue to age, because as I age, of course, things change and I have different ideas about these things. And just one more thing I wanted to say about that, about sort of my intention with my arts community. So I was talking to another local artist recently, and she's from Hong Kong, and she's absolutely lovely, one of my friends in my community. And we talked about how very often the other people that show up at shows, especially the opening nights of the private views, are artists. They're probably not, it depends on what your price point is. If it's still affordable, we'll buy your stuff. But if you're like up there, we're just here for the vibes. Like we're here to be interesting, to talk to the people who are coming for collectors. But that's a way to show up as well in the arts community so that the artist is not the only person there. Like the main artist is not the only person at their show, that they have people there that are mingling, that are talking to curators and collectors and other guests. And so I was talking with a friend about this idea of why we create these collectives and why, sometimes when you're tired, I just went to an opening a few weeks ago and I was tired and it was raining. And I got up and I got on the bus and I went down to the gallery and I rubbed elbows with people and I chit chatted and I made connections because the organizer is a wonderful person and she's part of my community. And I wanted to show that support for her. And so, like you said, sometimes it is work in terms of effort. But also, the flip side is when I have a show, I'm not saying that everyone has to show up because not everyone can show up. But I think that by going out and being seen at these community events, people know you and they say, oh, yeah, I will show up if I can. But yeah, you can't have a community without reciprocity. It's not possible.
So, if you listen to Ani's first episode here on Flourish in the Foreign in season 4, you would have known that a major factor motivating her to leave the US was her son, and specifically an incident that happened when he was quite small, I think in kindergarten or first grade, in which the school he attended truly over disciplined him in such an aggressive manner in which the police was called on this child. It was horrific to hear and I'm sure to live through. And so I was curious to know how living abroad has affected her son and how he has developed into a young man.
It was a wake up call for me, for sure, because I was not aware, like you said, intellectually that this happens, but the level of violence towards a 5-year-old Black boy was shocking to me as a parent as well. So I had enrolled him in school. He was in kindergarten. And in this particular instance, this classroom, they had a rainbow rug, and each child was assigned a square to sit on. The squares had different colors. And so he was assigned a particular square. And as I mentioned before, he's on the autism spectrum, so he tends to take things quite literally. Now at 18, not so much. He's learned a little bit of nuance, but at the point, at 5 years old, he's a very literal kid. And so that was his square, and he pushed another child. And I was called to the school, and I thought, oh, I'm going to apologize to the parents. I'm going to do whatever to make it right. I'm so sorry your child got harmed. And the other parents were not bothered whatsoever about it. It was the school itself. And this is an example of systemic racism and how these things happen. The principal of the school had called the city police. And so there was a sheriff there with a gun, an actual gun with bullets in it. And I think after 4 years in the UK, I have also become more sensitive to people carrying guns. And he just is, my 5-year-old is sitting there. And the principal said, no, no, the other parent, they were not that upset, but we thought it was important to show your son the gravity of what he had done. And they thought the best way to teach a Black boy his place was to call the police and threaten him essentially with a weapon. And so I took my son out of school, and eventually, for this part, I will say, listen to the episode because I don't want to go into it again. But yeah, eventually we ended up moving abroad, but that really opened my eyes in a lot of ways. He ended up getting a diploma in art and design from the University of the Arts London through Bath College. So he has that now. Um, yeah, and he's now at university. So he goes to a university, he's studying Japanese and philosophy. But for me, it has been so liberating and so freeing and so just relaxing to know that I got him to 18, that I raised him abroad, that he wasn't in a situation where so many people were projecting these false ideas onto him about Blackness and being a Black man and all these things that people in America deal with, that Black men in America deal with. So I feel quite proud of accomplishing that. And I feel really happy that he's at this stage. For him, and I was talking to another friend about that, an African American friend who lives in London. And she says it's so interesting because he doesn't really realize how privileged he is that you took him out of that situation and that he doesn't have to deal with that. So I have brothers, she has brothers, and we talk about like how as we watch our brothers age into their 40s and 50s, like how it does build up. And she said it's really interesting that he doesn't really feel it, that he walks very confidently. We went into a really nice restaurant in London and he just walks in really confidently and orders a truffle pizza. He doesn't act as if he doesn't belong in any space. he just walks into any space and he's just himself. And I feel like that's the biggest accomplishment. So in terms of how he feels, I can't really speak for him too much, but the way he behaves is that he's comfortable and he's just himself in the world, which was my goal. My goal was that I had someone ask me, I think it was a few months ago, about, because I told her the story of bringing my son abroad and, the point of it and everything. And she said to me, is he grateful? And I said, I don't think he's grateful, but that's the point. And she was a Black woman. And I think she didn't realize what she was asking until I explained to her. But the point is, I don't want him to be grateful. Why should he be grateful? He's a human. He should be free. And she was like, oh, I get, like, that was the point. The point was he's not been exposed to this level of trauma so that he knows to be grateful for his freedom. And his freedom, he takes it for granted. It's his. It's his birthright to be free and to do whatever he wants and to go study abroad in Japan and to, like, decide he wants to, whatever career he wants to study philosophy. He doesn't feel pressured into business or anything that in America, I feel like as Black people, we're told you have to be useful, do something useful. And he just gets to be, which I think as a parent is, not to toot my own horn, but I do feel very grateful myself that I was able to do that for him. And I feel very happy when he kind of acts entitled in a way. When he's like, we go to a hotel and he's like, why don't I have my own suite? I don't understand. And it's okay, it's fine. So yeah, so I like that. I can only speak for myself. I feel really proud and happy and just like the pressure is off. The pressure is off. Like I did it. I know he still has to get through university. So he has 2 more years left of university. But I do feel like, okay, I was able to raise a Black man outside of this systemic racism, or at least as far away from it as I could get him.
Something that affects a lot of you who are thinking about moving abroad with kids, which is visas and the challenges of visas if you have dependents. That goes hand in hand with dun, da, 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 aging abroad. Yeah, I asked Ani to share with us the challenges she has had to navigate as her son has aged out of being a dependent on her visa and what they decided to do.
So in the UK specifically, now this varies by country. So of course, anyone that's listening, you really need to do research on the country that you're choosing because it varies wildly by country. There are some countries where your kid turns 18 and they're off and they're out. I hear that a lot from Australians in the Middle East, where they say, my kid turned 18. I had to send them to Australia to go to university because they can't stay here as my dependent anymore. In the UK, it's slightly different. If you added someone as your dependent before they turned 18 and they are dependent on you, you can renew your visa and keep them your dependent. So, or you can switch to a new visa in country. If for any reason I have to leave the country and apply for a new visa outside of the country, I would not be able to add my son again. However, right now, he can remain my dependent as long as he doesn't get married or establish an independent life. As of age 16, because in the UK, from 16 to 18 is a bit of a murky area in terms of legally. So legally, you can get married without permission. You can leave home. There are lots of things that you can do. I think you can enroll in the armed forces. There are lots of things that you can do that you would associate with adulthood at 16. You can leave school without permission from your parents. So between 16 and 18, it's, are you an adult? Are you not an adult? It's murky. So when I renewed my visa, I had to prove that he was not living independently, that he was still dependent on me, and that he had not been married. So the idea is that it's not just about age, it's also about practical dependency. So whenever I renew my visa, I have to prove that again. And I also have to prove that he has been continuously living with me as my dependent since before he turned 18. There is an exception in the UK for students. And this is why I'm not allowing him, he's able to do what he wants, but I'm encouraging him to study abroad in Japan because the only exception to him living abroad is if he goes abroad for a university education. If he were to go abroad to work, then he would no longer be considered my dependent. If he goes abroad for a university education, as long as he's under the age of 24, which he is, he's still considered my dependent. So that's something I've personally thought about. I've definitely met lots of other people that are like, yeah, I'm moving to England. I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. And unfortunately, like the group chat is like, hey, by the way, your 19-year-old needs their own visa. And these people are like, what? Because it's such a shock to people. Because realistically, who is living on their own at 19? I mean, I was, but that was a severe situation. I was literally a foster kid. Do you know what I mean? It's not the norm. The norm is that 19, 20, 20. Lots of people move back home after university, like a huge number of people between like before they get their first job. So I think we think, oh, yeah, they're still my kid. Like I'm paying their university tuition. Like, why would they not be my dependent? But unfortunately, it really depends on the country. And so we got lucky in the UK that I'm able to keep him as my dependent and just keep rolling over every time I renew to just keep him as my dependent because at this point, I don't have to really worry about him being independent until he's 24. So yeah, I've got another 6 years of this.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. And if you are, please consider supporting this labor of love, but labor nonetheless, by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. Make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast and please review the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to the show. Fun fact, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave me comments that I can actually respond to. Yeah. Make sure you follow the podcast on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and all the other social media platforms that the podcast has. If you want to read more of my personal truths and musings as I explore and navigate the intersection of migration, Blackness, womanhood, and wellness, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings by Christine Job. And for all other Flourish in the Foreign resources about moving, living, and thriving abroad, including guides, courses, and more, be sure to go to flourishintheforeign.com. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. Now, back to the episode. Ani's husband is Moroccan, and I'm always super curious to learn as much as people are willing to share about how cultural differences show up in romantic and interpersonal relationships and how those differences are navigated.
I think especially when you're abroad, you are more likely to end up in a relationship with someone who's not from your home country, obviously, because there are more people out here that are not from your home country. So that's definitely something that we've discussed that I think every couple, every sort of intercultural or international couple, I suppose you would call it, have to discuss this idea of where you're going to raise children if you're going to have children. What's going to happen if your parents or my parents, in our case, his parents, but not, I don't have parents to worry about aging, but for him, he does. What are we going to do if they start to age? Would we move back to the country where they're living now, or would we try to import them or get them visas to come to where we're living? What if we are embedded in our communities and our jobs and our kids are in school? What do we do about that? What if I get super homesick and I want to go back and you have to get a visa because you're from a third country, you're from another country, and that particular country requires a visa to go to America. If I want to go for Thanksgiving or something, it's a bit of a hassle. We have to plan 3 months in advance. Otherwise, he may or may not be able to go with us. In terms of living there, it's pretty expensive to get a spousal visa. I think anybody who's ever gone through the green card process knows that it's not an easy process. So that's something to consider because he would need to do something like that to be able to live and work freely in America, which I think for a relationship you would want to. You wouldn't, well, not everyone. Some people are comfortable, for instance. Some people are trailing spouses. I don't know that they call them that anymore. It's a little bit old fashioned to say that, but in the sense that their spouse has a visa to live and work in a country and then they get permission to live there, but they can't get a job and they can't work. So some people are comfortable doing that. Some people are not. My husband would not be comfortable doing that. Like he likes to go out every day and work. Moroccans are so social It's such a social culture. If you go there, if you visit it, people are in cafes, they're talking, they're like peeking their heads, people pop up. Like I would go to my in-laws' house and people just show up just out of the blue. They're just like people at the door. And I'm looking at my husband like, who is this? He's like, I don't know. I don't know. Some guy. I don't know. And so they just pop up. So he's very social. And so I don't think he'd be comfortable just like whittling on the back porch, while I am doing everything. So I think anywhere we go, he'd have to have that ability to live and work freely and do whatever he wants to do. Um, so we've talked about it. He's agreed to go back to America with me if that's what I want, which is what I want. It still hasn't happened yet because I'm finishing my PhD here and there are other things here. But I think within the next 10 years, I will probably repatriate for myself. And he's agreed to go with me. When it comes to Morocco, it's a bit complicated because in that country, they have certain inheritance laws. So his parents are really old. I shouldn't say that. They're relatively old. So his parents were in their 40s and 50s when they had him, and he's the oldest child. So he only has one sister. So their inheritance laws are similar to Germany in that the country decides you don't get to write your will. The country decides what they are. So he has the responsibility of taking on his father's house and property when his father passes away. And he's indigenous to North Africa. So his father's house and property was his grandfather's, his great grandfather's, and so on. So there's that responsibility there that we've discussed. And I don't speak Darija or Arabic and I don't plan on learning it. I may learn French. The culture and my personality are such that I don't see myself ever living full time in Morocco. And so we've discussed maybe 3 months out of the year, we may go and do a holiday type thing. But I have been very clear that it's not really something that I would do. And he seems okay with that. He doesn't right now. He says he has no interest in going and living there again full time. So I think right now what we're looking at is between Europe and the USA for living together as an international couple, which helps a lot. But I've seen so many people where the minute they have kids, they're like, wait a minute, I want to take my kids back to my home country. So, we'll see how it unfolds over the years.
I asked Ani how she's preparing financially for aging abroad.
That's a really good question. And I'm actually really happy to talk about it because so many people don't talk about it. They don't discuss the complexity of having financial obligations in more than one country. And I often say to people here, and they're taken aback that I pay taxes in two countries, and they're like, wait, what? And I pay payroll taxes here in this country because I have a job. I pay property tax in this country because I live in a house and council tax goes with the renter, not just the homeowner. I pay property tax in my home country because I have land and I have properties there. And I pay income tax in my home country because we're American and we have worldwide taxation. That has already always been on my radar as a person living abroad. The complexities of managing finances in two countries, keeping different accounts open so that you can pay bills as they come up in different countries. But when it comes to retirement, I didn't really start thinking about it until I turned 40. So the last time you interviewed me, I was 39 and I'm 41 now. So it was at 40 when I really started to think about it. I was just kind of like going with the flow. I checked my social security statement. Now, to say something about this, it really depends on how much trust you have in the government and is it going to be there when it's time for you. So I'm getting up there. I've got another 20 years. So we'll see if in 20 years social security still exists. If it does, I've checked my statement. I have enough credits to give me a good amount in my retirement. So that's there if it's there. I also have a pension here in the UK because the job that I had before was a full-time permanent contract and my employer, they contributed to a pension for me and I contributed sort of the matching thing. And so I manage that in terms of I have basically a brokerage account that I manage through the pension here. And then there is a state pension in the UK, which doesn't pay very much. It's less than Social Security. But the more I work in the UK, the more credits I get through paying the national insurance and the national taxes. I'm invested in that pension as well, that state pension. So putting those state pensions aside, so the Social Security, the state pension in the UK, as well as my employer sponsored pension in the UK. I also still invest in my Roth IRA, which expats can do. It really depends on your income. So a lot of people who live abroad, this is specifically for Americans. So there may be other people, obviously, from other countries listening to this. But for Americans, we have what is called the foreign earned income exclusion. And some people take that because the first approximately $130,000 of income you make abroad, you can just brush that away. No, you don't have to pay taxes on that. But the thing about that is, if it brings your adjusted gross income to zero, then you can't invest in a Roth IRA because you can only put the amount in your Roth IRA up to what you earn. So let's say you take the foreign earned income exclusion credit and you once you're done, you made 135,000 that year. So the maximum you can invest in your Roth IRA would be 5,000 because your adjusted gross income would be 5,000 at maximum. So it really depends on how you manage your finances. And so you have to make those decisions for yourself. For me, because right now I'm getting a PhD and my income is relatively low, I don't take the foreign earned income exclusion. So all of my income, I report for tax purposes, and then I'm able to max out my Roth IRA every year. And I use my Roth IRA like a lot of people use these brokerage accounts. Like I'm trading options, I'm 10 toes down in terms of like I've made a 100% profit this year, like in terms of gains in my IRA. Yeah, it's gambling. Sorry. In a way, it's not completely gambling. Let me walk that back a little bit. I don't want to give bad advice to your listeners. You have to determine your own risk level. So I have a goal for myself because I started so late. My goal is to grow my capital to a certain point. When my capital gets to a certain point and I have a number in my head, I will then just move everything into an S&P 500 ETF. Now I have a portion in there already, and I have portions that I have staggered in terms of my options, and I do stock lending. I invest in dividend ETFs, things that are constantly putting income into the account because you're capped. For my Roth IRA, I can only put in the amount that the federal government says each year. And so if you are in an ETF that's earning 3 to 5% a year, then that's your max gains. So you really have to decide for yourself. And it depends on when you start. If you're 22, if you're like a 22-year-old digital nomad, expat, immigrant, and you're listening to this and you start investing the max every year, you do not have to take that much risk because it's going to compound over the years. So it just depends on your personal situation. But I would say take a look at what's available in your country and also take a look at your country. I have a relative amount of faith in the UK. They've been around for a long time. So I don't think the government's going to go belly up anytime soon. So, I mean, the government pension here is not much at all. It's like a few hundred to maybe £1,000 a month. It's really low. But I just don't think that the UK government is going to be dissolved in the next 20 years. With the US government, I also don't think the US government's going to be dissolved in 20 years, but Social Security, as we know from the news, has had some issues. So I just don't know if that's going to be there. But I would say, depending on the country you're in, look into their banking laws. I just heard a story about Usain Bolt. I just heard a story because one of the artists that I know that I'm friends with and Facebook friends with, and I've met her in person a few times, but she lives in America, but she's Jamaican American. And so she posted about like, why do Jamaicans not invest in Jamaica when they're abroad? And she's like, oh, because Usain Bolt like just lost 3 million US dollars, just evaporated from his bank account. So I don't know. You guys, listeners will have to Google. I'm not trying to slander anybody. You have to Google what actually happened. But she basically posted about this idea that they don't have the FDIC there, which is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And we have something similar in the UK. I think the first £185,000 that you put in your bank account is insured. In the US, the first $250,000 is insured. I don't know what they have in Jamaica because I don't live in Jamaica. But I bring that up to say that you should investigate the country that you live in before you invest in their banking system and just take a look and see how much confidence you have in it. So that's what I'll say about that because I don't want to slander anybody's country. Like I love all countries, but I'm just saying do your research.
I asked Ani how she sees herself as a professional as she ages abroad, how her goals and visions for herself professionally have evolved.
The longer I live abroad, the less pressure I feel to be successful in this outwardly successful way the more I feel that I should just really be enjoying my life. And so I have really slowed down in my practice. When I talked to you, I was ripping and running. I had done Japan and I had worked as a curator that year. I had done a show in London. I was just doing so much. And I've realized that I don't have to. I think for me as a Black girl, and it may be different for other Black women depending on how they grow up in their culture, but for me as a Black girl growing up in America, there was this expectation of, I don't know, like the magical Negro trope of you have to be the best at things. You have to be super accomplished. You have to be super educated. And I am super educated. I have 2 master's degrees. I'm getting a PhD. That's not a problem. But where's the room for ease and just enjoying our lives and just walking around and looking at the sky, really deeply engaging with the world around us? And so my art practice really engages with earth, with clay. I just got back in September, so about a month ago, from an ancestral clay workshop in rural France. So for 7 days, I was out there. We dug our own clay, we processed it, we did pit firing. It's very slow work, and it's work that's in tune with the rhythm of nature. And I think for me, as a Black girl growing up in America, I was divorced from the tune of nature, the rhythm of nature, because there was so much pressure to protect myself and to be a shield for my family in a way. This idea, at least in my family, and I think it depends on the type of family that you come from, but for my birth family, typically, if you manage to be successful, because not everyone can mentally and emotionally deal with what America does to Black people. And so I have some relatives that have just been on welfare their entire lives. And I honestly don't judge them for that. I think that is, as you know, the old folks say, everybody ain't able. But part of being in a community is that the people that were stronger had to do more work. And I found myself being strong. And so I found myself doing more work. And I found myself doing a lot of helping people. And for me now, this idea of success and helping and being the strong one has fallen to the wayside. And I specifically connect that to living abroad and not having these expectations around me now. When I did first move abroad, and probably the first 2 years, I would still get Facebook messages. Can you send me money for this? Can you pay these taxes? Can you pay my kids' tuition? Things like that. And I did what I could. But that distance really helped me have room to breathe, to really even say, like, I was able to sort of ignore messages because I'm 8 hours ahead of you. I'm in the bed. So there was this environmental buffer that really gave me space to enforce my boundaries in a way that I didn't have the space nor the will to do before, because there is also this extreme empathy that I think we develop as a people who are constantly dealing with these stressors. And then you look at somebody else who's been really beaten down by the system and you're like, I could pay off my student loans, but how about I just pay my uncle's rent because he's really stressed out this week? So that was also something that living abroad helped me with, because I wasn't constantly seeing people that I had to have sympathy or empathy for, and that I felt like I need to help them because it's really not their fault. And it really isn't. It's none of our fault. You know, we're born into what we're born into. Um, but for me, I have just stepped back, and my career, in terms of the work that I do, is not about money. It's about doing the creative work that I want to do. And I have just divorced the two things, the money from the career. And I, right now, in my investments, my land, my real estate, my husband pays all the bills, that sort of thing. And my career is for me. And I hope that I'm able to put something into the world that people can resonate with and that people can see and can feel good about, and that it stands the test of time. But I don't feel pressure. I feel like I have time. If I live to be 100, then that means I've got 60 more years to just keep making this work and to let people see it for what it is. And if I sell something, that's great. If I don't sell something, it's fine. I have a roof over my head. I have food. I have my studio in my back garden. And that, I think, is not something that I would have felt in America. I don't think I ever would have felt comfortable just being so simple and having such a simple life in America.
I've been really intrigued by the concept of beauty in relationship to aging. But Beauty is also a standard that a lot of us can feel as we navigate different spaces internationally. There are different beauty standards. What is beautiful one place is not beautiful another place. And how different cultures appreciate beauty, express beauty, or uphold beauty. And so I asked Ani, seeing as she's an artist, and so I feel artists know a lot of things about beauty, I asked her, how has her concept or even definition of beauty changed as she has lived abroad, but also as she has aged abroad?
It's been really interesting because obviously I'm getting older. I'm in my 40s now. And I have seen the shift. And I think in my late 30s, I really felt the shift from not getting the catcalls on the street sort of thing. But now I do still feel beautiful in that I feel like people are more likely to engage with me as a person. And so I'll often get comments before when I was young in my 20s and early 30s. I would get, oh, you're hot, you're thick, those sorts of things. But now people say to me, like, oh, you're shining. Oh, you have such good energy. And so is that good or is that bad? Because is it neutral? I don't know. But it's definitely a shift. And I think that it does have to do with living abroad. I think in America, I want to preface this by saying that I love, love, love Black American culture in terms of the hair, the nails, the makeup, like all the fashion, 100% love it. But I think also there is a lot of pressure to look a certain way in terms of like respectability politics, if that makes sense, because Black people are treated as caricatures of ourselves. We're not treated as whole human beings in America. We are very much judged by superficial means. And so when you are constantly, and this is normal for all humans, when you are constantly engaging with a society that only takes you at face value, then you put a lot more stock in your face, in the clothes that you wear, in the makeup that you wear, in anti-aging, in Black don't crack. It's fine if it cracks. It's fine. I'm happy to be here. My husband asked me, I have a few gray hairs, and he'll say, oh, are you going to cover those? No, I'm not. I've earned them and I'm happy with them. But also, I'm not in corporate America anymore. And so I can't judge someone who in corporate America is saying, I have to straighten my hair. I have to wear makeup. I have to cover my grays because their bread and butter is tied to it. So I have to be very careful internally not to project onto people that are still dealing with those things. Because I came from a society where we had to deal with those things. But living abroad, I'm already the other. So I don't really deal with beauty standards. European beauty standards have nothing to do with me. They have no relation to me whatsoever. And that's very freeing. So, yeah, so being abroad has really changed how I look at myself. And I look at myself more as I want to exude that energy of when people are in the room with me, that they feel more at ease, that they feel comfortable. And I get it a lot. I get people will start telling me about their lives or the comments I get I was at Sainsbury's the other day shopping, and this woman comes up to me and she says, your dress is really beautiful. It's perfect for you. And then she looked me up and down and she said, and you're glowing. And if you know England, you know people don't talk to strangers here. And I think that has to do with how my internal being has shifted. And then I'm a little bit more open and comfortable, and I'm not defensive, and I am able to go very slowly in a way. So I know the question was about beauty, but I think that is a form of beauty that you can gain with aging as you become so comfortable in yourself, in your skin. And if you're able to put yourself in an environment where you're not constantly being attacked and you get to put your defenses down and you just get to be soft and open and flowy and just glowy, that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Even if I went through the rest of my life and I never looked in the mirror again, I would still feel that beauty in my core of being comfortable and being relaxed and putting that energy into the world.
Wellness. I asked Ani what is her current definition of wellness and how has her concept and practice evolved from the last time we spoke, but also in relation to aging abroad. What is wellness to her? What does it really mean? Or what does she hope for it to mean?
So for me, I think wellness has definitely shifted because of my diagnosis with my tumor, the surgery that I went through specifically. Those two things, when I sat across from the surgeon, who was an excellent surgeon, really wonderful healthcare that I received here, which I'm really grateful for. But they weren't able to tell me what caused it. And so, of course, to the Googles. What do? You go to the Googles. So I joined a support group because the tumor that I have is relatively rare. So there was a support group on Facebook, a few thousand people. I mean, all over the world, Thailand, India, like all over the world, there were people in this support group because it's such a rare tumor that, we all sort of come together. And so people are just like, what's causing it? What's causing it? And one of the themes that came up again and again was stress and bad stress. And I think last time we talked about wellness, we talked about stress and good stress versus bad stress. And I just started to wonder, was that the way? And this is going to sound a little bit sort of alternative medicine now. Was that my body expelling that stress? And I sort of had this visual of my body's up all of the stress, all of these negative emotions and this pressure that I'd felt for all of these years, gathering it up into this mass, this ball that became this small orange, sort of mandarin orange sized tumor on the side of my face and pushing it to the surface. And my surgeon did the scan for the surgery. I had to do some kind of scan where you get into a big loud machine. I can't remember what it's called. But see, he does the scan and he says, oh, it's actually in a really good spot. It's right on the surface. I can just cut it off, which he did. He just took it off. And I thought, did my body do that? Did my body collect all of the negative energy? Because after my surgery is when people started saying to me, you're glowing. And I wondered, that's a bit alternative medicine, a bit like maybe this is what our bodies do. And so my idea of wellness has become very holistic. It has become that I really need to listen to my body completely because I felt like that was my body giving me a demonstration of its intelligence that I do not need to be conscious of. Sort of my subconscious body is just doing what it does to take care of itself. And if I relax and if I trust my body to do what it needs to do, then I will necessarily be well. And so that's really where I'm at now. This idea of when I need to rest, I just rest. Sometimes I do push myself a little bit, like I mentioned the other day, going out to the gallery, even though I was tired and it was raining. So I push myself in small ways, but I don't push myself in big ways anymore. I just let it go. Whatever is going to be is going to be. Because for me, I think that more than food and diet and exercise, which are all really important things, I think managing our internal stress is the key to wellness. And so, one of the ways that we can manage our internal stress is doing what we can when we can do something. And when we come up against a wall or something that we can't change, we just accept it and let it go. Like, really, at our core, let it go so that it's not building up in our body. So, that's where I'm at right now with the wellness idea.
Thank you so much, Ani, for sharing so much of your wisdom and time with me. I really appreciate you. If you enjoyed this conversation with Ani, you can keep up with her online via her website and social media.
So I have a website. It is Ani Lacy, ANILACY.com. And the very first page is my mailing list. So if you want to know about my upcoming shows, exhibitions, sort of anything that's going on with me in my artwork, you're welcome to check me out there and join the mailing list. Also, I'm on Instagram at Ani Lacy Ceramics. I don't post I said this before, but I don't post as much as I should. I will post more as I build my studio out. And I'm also on Threads now, which is the same. It's linked to my Instagram account. I'm not on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. I do have a Facebook page, which is Ani Lacy on Facebook. So there's like a professional artist page that I also post with more photos of my work. So if you're interested in art and you're interested in my work, you can check me out there.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Flourish in the Foreign. To learn more information about this guest, be sure to check out their show notes page on the website flourishintheforeign.com. If you'd like to delve deep into my personal thoughts about life abroad, be sure to subscribe to my Substack, Flourish in the Foreign, Truths and Musings. If you enjoy this solo indie Black woman podcast, be sure to support this podcast by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/flourishforeign. You can also support the podcast by subscribing to the podcast, leaving a review of the podcast, and of course, sharing the podcast. For resources like the Move Abroad with Intention guide and course, be sure to check the links in the description of this episode and the website flourishintheforeign.com. To learn more about me, Christine Job, my work as a business strategist, and all my resources about business strategy, building a business, and more, check out the links in the description of this episode and go to christinejob.com. Big thanks to all of you, my lovely listeners who have kept this podcast going strong for 6 seasons. Thank you all so much. I love you and I appreciate you. And thanks to Zachary Higgs for producing the music for this here podcast. Remember, it is not about moving abroad. It's not about being abroad. It's about thriving abroad. It's about flourishing abroad. So go abroad and cultivate a life well lived. See you next time. Bye. In the next episode of Flourish in the Foreign.
In the places that I have lived, as I have aged, I feel like I have become less visible. The difference is I don't really care. Like, it's not hurting my feelings that, where I would walk in a room in my 20s and 30s and people would take notice. That doesn't necessarily happen now, except in Portugal. Didn't live there, just visited, but definitely was seen in a way that I had not been seen in a long time.